He had been sitting at that same table for 3 years, always alone. No one ever approached him. Not once. Until that winter morning when a little girl with no hair holding a scruffy teddy bear stood beside his table and said, "Mister, I'm really tired. Can I sit here?" And strangely enough, he didn't ask who she was or where she came from. He just nodded. Every morning was the same. He came in quietly, right on time, and sat in the same spot by the window. Nobody ever stopped to talk to him. After a while, even the staff stopped noticing. He'd never look around or make a sound. Just sipped his espresso, left a bill under the saucer, and walked out like he was never really there. 3 years. Nothing changed. But that day, something felt different. A small voice broke through the usual silence just as he was about to lift his coffee. "Mister, I'm really tired. Can I sit here for a little bit?" He turned to look. There she was, a tiny girl, maybe no more than 3 or 4 years old, standing there in front of him. Her winter coat was so big it looked like it was swallowing her up. Her beanie was pulled low, almost down to her eyebrows. She clutched a faded gray teddy bear to her chest, and under the edge of that hat, her head was bare. He didn't say a word, just reached across the table and pulled out the chair across from him. The little girl climbed up carefully, using both hands to pull herself onto the seat, like she was climbing a hill. Once she got settled, she placed her teddy on the table and gently smoothed its head with her tiny fingers. "His name's Hope," she said softly, still not looking at him. "He's tired too. Just like me." The way she said it, so quiet but clear, made the words stay in his mind a little longer than it should have. Hope, that name. It used to mean everything to him. Caleb, his son, had once named his favorite stuffed dog Hope, a small yellow one with floppy ears that he carried around everywhere until the day he couldn't anymore. This little girl didn't know that, didn't know anything about him. But somehow the way she spoke, the way she sat close to that bear, like it was a real friend, stirred something in his chest that had been sitting still for too long. He took off the gray scarf he'd wrapped around his neck, folded it gently in half, and laid it over her shoulders. Not because he felt sorry for her, not because it was the polite thing to do, just because no kid should have to shiver that much in the middle of winter, especially one too small and too tired to even ask for anything more than a place to sit. She didn't ask who he was, didn't wonder why he sat by himself every day, didn't even say thank you. She just sat there quietly, hands resting in her lap, her eyes still fixed on the bear lying still on the table. And strangely, it didn't feel awkward at all. There were no introductions, no forced conversation, no questions asked. Just a man and a little girl sitting together in a quiet corner, sharing a moment of calm neither of them seemed to know they needed. He watched her for a bit, long enough to see she wasn't the kind of child who talked to strangers for fun. She didn't seem afraid, didn't seem lost. She just looked tired, like a leaf that had been drifting in the wind for too long and had finally landed. He didn't try to ask anything. Instead, he slowly rested his hand flat on the table, leaning slightly toward the bear. She followed the movement with her eyes, then tilted her head a little and said, "Me and Hope just got back from the hospital. It took a while, so we're kinda worn out." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but every word felt steady and real. He didn't say anything back. There was no need. And in that quiet, still moment, Nathan, a man who hadn't spoken to anyone in months, felt like he'd just exhaled for the first time in years. The little girl didn't say anything more. She just sat there for a while, hands gently folded in her lap like she was waiting for something quiet to pass. Nathan stayed silent too. He wasn't used to starting conversations, especially not with a child who had just appeared out of nowhere, like a breath of air slipping into the corner of an ordinary day. After a while, she turned slightly toward the bear, tracing her small finger along the loose stitching on its back. Me and him just came back from the clinic, she said softly. Took a while, so we're a bit tired. Her voice barely rose above the soft drip of coffee somewhere in the café. But Nathan heard every word. He didn't ask what kind of clinic. Didn't nod either. But deep inside, something shifted. A kind of cold that didn't come from the weather but from somewhere beneath the skin. Still not looking at him. She added, as if explaining to no one in particular. Mommy's outside on the phone, so don't worry, mister. That made Nathan glance up. It had been a long time since someone told him that don't worry. And the one saying it was a little girl in an oversized coat, hugging a worn-out bear, her head bare under a knitted cap. There was no one else like her. She went on telling him about the waiting room, the nurse who always forgot her name, and a comic book that lived in the far corner of the doctor's desk, the kind only kids would know how to find. Nathan didn't say much, just listened. Not because he understood everything, but because her voice slowed things down. It had been a long time since anyone sat with him without making him feel more alone. Once Caleb had talked about a comic book in a doctor's office too. That day he held Nathan's hand under the table the whole time. It was the last appointment before he didn't need doctors anymore. What's your name? The girl asked, snapping him gently back to now. He looked down at the table, then answered Nathan. I'm Ivy, she said, a small smile curling at the corners of her lips. I think you're like someone from a storybook, the kind of person who always sits alone, but not because they're sad, just because they're waiting for something. Nathan wasn't sure what to say. Maybe she was just being playful, but somehow her words made it a little harder to breathe. Then Ivy leaned closer to the bear. Hope likes this spot, she said. No one pushes, no one talks too loud. Just sitting here feels enough. Nathan chuckled, not loudly, not obviously, but enough to feel real. The kind of laugh that hadn't visited him in years. Ivy turned toward the door, her face lighting up as she spotted someone entering. A small woman wrapped in a brown coat, eyes tired, steps quick. She moved toward them. You're sitting here? The woman asked gently, a touch of worry in her voice. Yeah. I was tired, so I asked the man if I could sit for a bit. Ivy replied, glancing up at Nathan for a silent nod. He gave a slight one. The woman looked at him for a moment, as if measuring something. Then she nodded back and said quietly, Thank you. Nathan wasn't sure how to respond. She reached out for Ivy's hand. Before leaving, Ivy turned back and gave a tiny wave. Thank you, mister. I feel warmer now. That was it. No big moment. No dramatic goodbye. Just a soft little sentence that made Nathan sit a while longer than usual. The coffee was still half full. The seat across from him empty again. But it didn't feel like just any empty chair. It felt like it still held a bit of warmth. And for some reason, Nathan wasn't quite ready to leave. That morning, he didn't expect anything special. And yet he looked around the room before even sitting down. The air wasn't any colder than the day before, but his hands stayed deep in his coat pockets, like he was holding on to something he didn't quite know how to say. He picked the same table as always. The coffee came hot as usual. But for some reason, he didn't touch it. Instead of looking out the window like he normally did, his eyes kept drifting to the chair across from him, still empty. He told himself maybe she just wasn't coming today. Maybe she'd been tired yesterday, needed to rest. Nothing unusual about that. And yet, something in him kept stirring. Since Ivy showed up, that old table hadn't felt so cold anymore. Just a child, a few words soft as breath, and a little bear named Hope. And somehow that was enough to make him sit a little longer, breathe a little deeper, think about the things he'd tried to forget. But today, none of that was there. Just him, an empty chair, and a small kind of hollow he couldn't quite name. He stayed for almost 30 minutes, then stood up, slid the usual bill under the plate, and headed out. At the door, he paused, turned his head just once. Still no one. The next day, Ivy came back. No warning, No bright hello like he'd imagined. No big smile. She just stood there, one arm wrapped tight around Hope, the other holding onto the edge of her coat. Her eyes looked a little swollen, and there was a small bandage on her left wrist. Nathan didn't ask. He simply stood up and pulled out the chair. Ivy climbed into the seat, placed Hope gently on the table, and ran her hand over his head slowly. "I went to the hospital yesterday," she said. "They took my blood. Then the doctor said I had to stay." Mommy let Hope sleep next to me. Her voice was tired, but not sad. More like she was just telling him about her day, like brushing her teeth or having breakfast. Nathan nodded and nudged his gray scarf toward her. "I thought maybe you wouldn't be here today," Ivy said. "I'm here every day," he answered softly, like it was a secret. She gave him a tiny smile. Then she sat quietly, arms wrapped around her bare eyes, lowered to the table. After a moment, Ivy tilted her head. "Mommy said I was brave yesterday," she whispered. "But I think Hope was braver. He didn't cry. He didn't even move." Nathan chuckled, not loudly, but just enough for Ivy to know he was really listening. "Does he have magic or something?" he asked. Ivy shook her head. "No. But he stays quiet. And being quiet can be brave too, right?" Nathan didn't say anything after that. He just looked at her, not out of curiosity, but because he realized something. He had been waiting for her. Not for someone to talk to. Just someone to sit across from him. Someone small, but enough to make a table with 2 chairs feel less alone. Ivy didn't ask who he was. She never mentioned her dad. And she didn't bother with all the usual grown-up questions. But she came. She sat. And she brought with her a little warmth Nathan didn't know he'd missed. And for the first time in 3 years, Nathan left the cafe with slower steps. In his coat pocket was something extra, a tiny pink hair clip Ivy had forgotten on the table. He didn't leave a note, didn't plan to keep it for long. He just knew tomorrow he'd come on time, and maybe stay a little longer. Nathan had just taken a small sip of his coffee when the bell above the cafe door jingled. He didn't look up right away. People came and went all the time. But then came a soft voice. "Mr." He looked up, and there she was, Ivy. She stood just inside the doorway, one hand holding onto Hope, the teddy bear, the other tugging along a woman, tall, slender, with a slightly tired face, like she hadn't quite made up her mind about coming in. Nathan got up instantly. "I told you, Mom, he always sits at this table," Ivy said, like she was proudly showing someone her favorite hiding place. "Can we sit? Just for a little bit?" The woman looked a bit unsure. Not unfriendly, just cautious. Nathan gave a small nod and gently pulled out a chair. "Hello," he said softly. "Hi," the woman replied, her voice a little hoarse but kind. "Ivy talks about you all the time. I hope we're not intruding." "Not at all," Nathan smiled. "Honestly, I'm glad you came." The 3 of them sat down. No one said much at first. Ivy placed Hope on the table like she always did, then adjusted the scarf around the bear's neck, still Nathan's gray one. "I haven't forgotten," she said. "But Hope wants to wear it a few more days." Her mother raised an eyebrow. "Whose scarf is that?" Ivy pointed at her neck, where the scarf was gently wrapped. "Mister gave it to me a few days ago. It's warm. Hope sleeps better with it." Nathan chuckled softly. Ivy was still Ivy, even with someone else beside her. She held on to her tiny little world. And now, he realized he was a part of it too. Her mother reached over and gently touched her daughter's hand. "She had a bit of a fever last night," she said, "but the moment she woke up, she asked if we could come see you." Ivy turned to Nathan and whispered, "I didn't want you to be here alone, without your scarf." Nathan didn't say anything, but he smiled. A little while later, the woman looked at him and said quietly, "You know, she doesn't usually talk much to strangers." Nathan nodded. "Same here, but I guess kids, they just know how to find the right key." They looked at each other just a moment, but long enough to understand that some things don't need to be explained. As they were about to leave, Ivy tilted her head up and asked, Will you be here tomorrow too? Nathan leaned down a little, looking right into her eyes, and answered gently, I will, but maybe not alone this time. Ivy nodded like it was the most natural thing in the world. Then just before walking out the door, she turned and added, I'll bring back your scarf tomorrow. But can Hope borrow it for a few more days? Nathan glanced at the little bear pressed tightly against her chest and nodded. No more words were needed. Just that. A man who'd sat alone for 3 years. A little girl with a bear. And a mother whose eyes looked like they'd known more goodbyes than they deserved. But today the three of them sat together. And maybe, just maybe, that table didn't feel so empty anymore. Nathan had just grabbed his coat when a soft knock came from the door. It wasn't often someone showed up unannounced, so he paused. When he opened it, Claire was standing there, one hand holding a small paper bag, her jacket, half-zipped hair a little messy from the wind. Sorry, I know it's early, she said, looking slightly unsure. But Ivy told me today's Hope's birthday. Nathan blinked, then looked down. Ivy was right behind her mom, hugging Hope tight. Her eyes met his, gentle, expectant. He's never had a birthday cake before, she said softly. Can we make one for him? For some reason, that sentence caught in his throat. It wasn't about the cake. It was just... It had been so long since anyone said the word birthday to him with that kind of excitement. Back when Caleb was still here, birthdays used to mean something. Now he couldn't even remember the last time he'd blown out a candle. Nathan looked at Ivy, then nodded. Of course. Hope's birthday definitely needs a cake. The cafe was quiet that afternoon. They sat in their usual corner where the sunlight stretched gently across the table through the glass. Ivy placed Hope carefully in the center. Claire pulled out a small cake from the bag, just big enough to fit in a palm, with a single yellow candle poking out the top. Do you want to light it? Nathan asked. Ivy shook her head and pushed the cake gently toward him. I think you should do it. He smiled and lit the candle. The tiny flame danced, flickering just enough to feel like it might disappear any second. Claire looked at him and said gently, Did Caleb like birthday candles? It was the first time someone had said his name out loud in front of Nathan. No hesitation, no detour. Just a simple question like asking about the weather, and Nathan nodded. He loved them. Every year he'd wait for the exact time to blow them out. When he was 3, he counted the candles wrong, but still insisted, I'm a big boy now. Ivy tilted her head. Then, maybe this year we can blow one for him too. Nathan didn't answer. He just looked at the little flame. It reflected in his eyes, and something inside him softened. Then all 3 leaned forward and Ivy counted. 1, 2, 3. Blow. The flame disappeared. And in that small, quiet moment, Nathan didn't make a wish. He just let out a slow breath, like releasing something he'd been holding on to for way too long. Claire reached over and brushed her daughter's shoulder. Ivy rummaged in her coat pocket and pulled out a tiny paper hat cut from pink cardstock with a crooked letter H drawn in pencil. I made this for Hope, she said. But my drawing's kind of messy, so please don't laugh. Nathan took the little hat, gently placed it on Hope's head, and smiled. He really pulls off pink, he said. Ivy nodded proudly. Pink feels happy. Claire turned to Nathan, her voice softening. You know, when Ivy first came home and talked about you, I was a little surprised. She doesn't usually open up to anyone outside the family. And suddenly she's telling me about a man named Nathan with a warm scarf and an empty chair. Nathan chuckled. I wasn't expecting a little girl to come sit in that chair either. They stayed for a while longer. No one said much. Ivy leaned on her mom. Hope lay quietly in the center of the table. The cake, untouched, still sat with its candle barely melted. Claire glanced over. Would you like to take the cake with you, maybe, for Caleb? Nathan looked at her and nodded. Yeah. Today feels like a good day to bring something home to him. On the walk back, he carried the cake in both hands, tucked safely in its paper box. The cold didn't sting like it used to. In his coat pocket was the pink hair clip Ivy had forgotten weeks ago, and a small folded note she had slipped into his hand just before they left. It read, "After the birthday, can we still be friends?" Nathan smiled. Just a little, but it was real. And for the first time in 3 years, life didn't feel like a line of days stretching on endlessly. It felt like tiny pieces, gentle